This panel is all about a half decade of real-time payments and reflecting on the NPP's impact and the future impact as well. So our panellists for this session are Yume Leahy from Wise, Christian Westerlin-Wigstrom from Manuva, Katrina Stewart from the Australian Payments Plus, and David Marsh from Endava. And moderating our panel, we have Jennifer Harrison from Reputation Edge. Welcome.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Now, February 2018, if you can cast your mind back, that is when Australia's new payments platform went live. And the key features that it brought to the market were instant real-time payments, 24/7 payments, not just payments inside bank hours, Monday to Friday, more messaging characters, which meant you could send more data with payments, and a simplified form of addressing that we know as Pay ID. So my first question is to Christian. Can you give us a couple of examples of how Manuva has been able to innovate off the back of those features enabled by the NPP?
Great plug. Thank you. Yeah. I don't think Manuva would be anything like what it currently is if it hadn't been for this. So you said February 2018, so half a decade ago. It was around Valentine's Day, and the love story with real-time payments began for a lot of us. And for those who thought that was always going to be the standard, it might have felt like, oh, what took you so long? But the experience since then has moved very quickly from being this cool new thing to the expected. And so for us at Manuva, so we're a payments automation platform, it's very hard to optimize and make things really exciting for anyone if the underlying infrastructure doesn't allow for exciting things. It's very hard to create a great experience if the road that you put in your cool car on says you can drive 5 kilometers an hour every 2 hours and then you have to stop again. That's never going to be great, even if the car is amazing. So what this has allowed us to do is to, I think in many ways, just cater to expectations that were increasingly there in the market anyway. And it's also, I think, allowed people to say, well, if that could change, what else could change? And I think we're getting to that probably a bit later on. One thing that had to coincide, it wasn't built into the infrastructure necessarily, but it was made possible by the infrastructure, is that as soon as you move money in real time, the fractions of time that you have available to you to understand where money is coming from shrinks pretty quickly too. So if you have 2 hours to find out whether you want to accept these funds or not, then you have 2 hours to go through your ledger and maybe make a few phone calls and take a coffee break and come back and deal with it again. And at some point, okay, those $100 came from Jenny or Johnny or James or someone. Things are meant to be real time. Everything has to be real time, not just the fund transfer itself, but everything else around it, the way you think about it, but also very importantly, your reconciliation. So one thing that was critical for Manuva from the early on was in order to make this something that was actually real time, you need to make every part of the experience real time, including the reconciliation. So we launched pretty early on, together with Wise, in fact. We launched this thing we call Automatcha, which is real-time reconciliation of real-time receipts. Because if you know that money has arrived right now, but you need to find out from whom it is in an hour's time, you might as well just wait an hour. Why do this big investment in real time if you can't make any sense of it, if you can't use it? So that was the first thing that we really made a big difference, where you could know exactly who paid you, exactly when you get it. The second thing is, of course, that, and then I'll stop, we often think of NPP as an amazing way of moving funds very quickly and very cleverly, etc., with emojis and Batman symbols and all the rest of it, between bank accounts. And that's fine for peers. If I pay you for dinner last night, that's probably right. You don't need to know more than that. But if I'm a business, then knowing in my bank account that I have the funds isn't good enough, because that's not where I need to action stuff. I need to action stuff in my ERP system. So the fact that my bank knows that I have $1 million that's just been received, or $10,000, is like having this super fast train line stopping 300 meters from the platform, but I'm on the platform. So what Manuva was able to do was to build the last 300 meters of rail, so that not only do you know who paid you, exactly when you get paid, you also know who paid you, exactly when you got paid, and in the place you need to action it. So you can send a thank you message to your client or your customer, or something like that. Anyway, I've been waffling on, but it's half a decade of innovation, so it's very hard to condense to 2 seconds. All right.
Perfect. And Christian, a year ago we were talking a lot at Intersekt about Pay2. Where are we now with Pay2? And what is Manuva doing with Pay2?
So we've had half a decade of NPP and half a year of Pay2, I would say. And that's a bit unfair because obviously Pay2 has been around since 1st of July last year, but not really. So one thing that's always exciting when you do something new is, of course, what everyone else thinks about it. Because you might think, I personally think this is the best thing since something else, and I don't even like sliced bread, so it's the best thing since non-sliced bread. But you need proper production level experience, customer experience, sort of experience along the supply chain, and we have other people on here to make sense of it. And what I think we've found is that the infrastructure itself, the consent mechanism that is the true innovation in Pay2 is working very well if you can find it. So if you're an end customer and you're just being told here's this amazing real-time way of getting immediate service access, and you're saying, yes, please, I want this. I don't want to pay merchant service fees if you're the merchant. I don't want to be paying the surcharge if you're the customer. And you're meant to be receiving this text message or in-app message that says authorized, and you can't find it. It's going to be it's been hard to roll out. I think other than that, it's been a remarkably successful rollout, but there's still a bit of work to do, particularly on sort of service variability, etc.
Great, thank you. Katrina, 5 years. It probably feels like it's gone by in a flash. What are some of the highlights of what you've achieved at the NPP over the last 5 years?
Thanks, Jennifer. It feels like maybe about 15 years, but it has been a journey, and what I'm really most proud of, I think, is the impact that the NPP has had on people's lives. So not just the fact that I can, make a payment and it'll go through in seconds, but the fact that Services Australia could use the NPP to send out hundreds of thousands of COVID disaster relief payments to citizens over a weekend and get that money to people who need it. The young lady who, I think she's up in Queensland, who has a slight mental disability, who can run her own coffee business because she's using PayID and she doesn't have to touch the money. She doesn't need to think about the change. And she's been able to expand her business and actually hire additional people to run that for her as well. The fact that businesses can use PayID to receive payments from their customers, and particularly we saw during COVID when businesses had to pivot to remote forms of payment, and so the yoga instructor who could continue to do her courses online by using PayID. So I think it's really been the impact actually that the NPP has delivered to people's lives and across all segments and all sectors. It's been a long journey. I kind of took a little while to ramp up, but now we're at about sort of 1.4 billion transactions a year, and I think it's really exciting to see what the NPP has delivered.
Now, NPP is infrastructure. Can you explain how do people actually connect to this infrastructure, and what are the different ways people can connect?
So the platform was designed to kind of be sort of as open access as possible, because we're talking about the movement of money in real time. To be part of that process, you do need to be an authorised deposit-taking institution and have a licence in order to actually do the clearing and settlement of payments. But and so that those, as we call them, participants can connect directly or indirectly, and we've got about 14 of those. What we've found, though, over the years is majority of the organisations want to connect indirectly through someone else. And even larger financial institutions have taken that path, and so we've got about 95 organisations that have connected through a sponsor as what we call an identified institution. And that pathway is open to non-ADIs as well, so FinTechs like Maneuver is one, and we have a growing number of those who are connecting that way. And also, very excitingly, more recently, we have what we call a connected institution. And Zepto, I'm sure there's someone here from Zepto in the audience, was our first connected institution. And what that enables them to do is they can connect directly. They're not involved in the clearing and settlement of payments. They're basically using Pay2 to initiate payments. But as a non-ADI, they can connect directly and choose to come on board that way. And then there's a whole raft of organisations that are just using the platform as well. So they can go through a bank or a payment service provider like Maneuver or someone else to access the NPP and its services.
Great, thank you. And part of the NPP's mandate is to support innovation. And so I just wanted to ask, could you explain to people how do you support innovation, and also what's coming up on your own product roadmap?
And we'll be talking more about this at 1 o'clock if people want to come along and listen. Shameless plug. So we've been very focused from an infrastructure perspective on what are some of the kind of foundational sort of level of capability that we need to put in place. And I kind of liken it to Lego building blocks. It's kind of what do we need to basically put in place and define the rules in terms of how that gets used by the banks, and then others can basically build on top of that and build their own solutions around things like Pay To and Pay ID. And we've really tried to focus on capability that will be broad and extendable and support a range of different use cases. So Pay To is something that we've actually been working on more than half a decade, actually started in about 2017, which was really the number one capability we heard from the market was organisations saying, I want to be able to initiate payments from a customer's account. And so that's been truly kind of a fundamental piece of capability that we've worked on delivering. And I think from an innovation perspective, I think it'll be truly transformational, and I think that's what's really exciting about it.
Thank you, Katrina. You may. So Wise, formerly known as TransferWise, does connect directly into the NPP. Can you explain what benefits that allows you to bring into your products and services?
Great question. So before I answer your question, I want to introduce Wise. So Wise is a technology company on a mission to make money without borders. Instant, convenient, transparent, and eventually free. Now, how we do that, we have 3 products. The Wise Account, which allows customers to send, spend, receive, and hold money in multiple currencies. Wise Business for SMEs, and Wise Platform for banks and enterprises. Now, I can answer your question, because why do we want to connect to the NPP? Well, because it brings us closer to our mission, right? Money without borders. On the speed topic, because we're able to cut the middleman, we get access to real-time clearing and settlement. Transfers can essentially be instant, right? And how we define instant is under 20 seconds. On convenience, we get access to Pay ID and Pay To, and actually that's in the roadmap in the next couple quarters. And then lastly, on transparency and costs, we are obviously able to benefit from huge cost savings that we can then pass on to customers.
Great. And in the world of cross-border payments, I know Wise also connects into the fast payment network in the UK, for example. Where are we in terms of being able to do instant and free cross-border payments? Yes, so we are not only integrated with the NPP, so we are also integrated with FAST in Singapore, FPS in the UK, as you said, and also to the scheme in Hungary. So this is not a new topic for us. What we're seeing is that more governments are looking into improving their real-time domestic payment infrastructure. So we see that as the first step. Now, more evolved governments are starting to look at cross-border linkages. So Singapore, India is an example of that. However, as these conversations are somewhat still early on, we're still looking into the space. And there's some issues that we're not sure if they will get solved, and perhaps more conversations need to happen. So for example, in the Singapore-India case, we actually need to use a bank for settlement, right? And that means that the bank actually is the one controlling the FX, right? Which kind of negates the impact that we're trying to bring, right, in lowering cost. So obviously, as more governments start to improve their domestic rails first, then international will come next. But I think there's still a lot more to be discussed in how it will play out. Thank you. And David, as an industry advisor to fintechs, what are some of the decisions they're having to make around the technology and payment orchestration, and decisions they're having to make today? But payments is going to change very fast. 5 years has gone by in a flash. How are they making decisions today such that they're still going to be agile tomorrow?
Yeah, thanks. So I've been working in payments for quite a while, and I guess if I rewind back in my career, I spent some time at Westpac and Commonwealth Bank in the institutional banking, helping corporates, I guess, switch between banks and basically re-engineer all our payables and receivables processes. So there's a whole bunch of considerations for fintech's clients, essentially, in this space, so the kind of corporate Australia, if you like, in terms of how they get from their existing technology to using modern technology and the great features of Pay To. To be clear, I think there's some fantastic opportunity to be realized there, right? So, I've spoken to a lot of corporations through my career. treasurers, do they want to see real-time visibility over the liquidity position? Absolutely. Do they want to be able to reconcile to invoice level matching? Absolutely. Do they want to be able to switch banks without actually impacting their end customer and have a better customer experience overall? Absolutely. I think the challenge in this space is that those organizations and the fintech's customers have essentially, over time, their systems have grown organically, and for them to realize the benefits of Pay2, they need help with that, because I guess there's the term tech debt that technology people use. It's a broad term that covers years and years of organic growth from a technology perspective. And so I think for fintech, we've got to help customers through that journey to realize the benefits.
Yep. And where do you still see that there are some frictions in the end-to-end payment process? And is it a good idea to take all the friction out of it, or do we still need some positive friction at some points? What do you think?
It's a very topical question. So I don't know if anyone saw this morning's announcement by Westpac. In their banking application, they're starting to ask customers questions about payments when they're initiated. So, who's this payment going to? Is it going to a friend? Is it going to someone you don't know? And through that, they're essentially trying to assess the risk of fraud and scams, which is a stubborn problem in Australia. So I guess you've got to consider that against a backdrop of some of the discussions that are happening globally. In the UK, the payment service regulator there has been looking at the question of reimbursing transactions and who's liable in that situation, and they're sort of looking at the banks and splitting the liability between the banks. And so I think there's a natural conversation playing out there in terms of how can you minimize risk, where does that risk sit, and do we need to put more friction into the end-to-end journey? From a professional standpoint, working for Endava, I think when we were approached this, we would basically support product owners by with our product strategists, doing some user empathy work to understand what's of value to the customers and what they would like to see. From a personal standpoint, I'm a little bit nervous about if I'm trying to make a payment and there's all these questions and eventually my transaction gets rejected. I'll be quite frustrated if I actually genuinely felt the payment was safe, but I'm conscious that I'm a bit of a payments nerd, so I like to feel that I've got a good sense of the element of risk there. So I think it's a really interesting conversation that's playing out. I think everybody will take their own position on it. When I look at NPP and I compare that against the card rails, I'd hate to see NPP just become a replication of the card rails. I think it would be awesome if we had some sort of option there where there was sort of two variants of payment. One was, no liability, and maybe one had some kind of protection. I think that would be a nice space from a personal standpoint, but it'd be interesting to see how things develop over time.
Just super quickly on that, so it is, as you say, a very live conversation. While we need to recognize the very real problems of scams and fraud, and also, I've never heard the expression before, positive friction. It's like saying nice fighting or something, but yes. So while there is, I think, an absolute, there's a space for that, and there needs to be a sort of an honest conversation about where the real problems are. It feels at points a bit like we're using yesterday's tools to fight tomorrow's problems, or we're innovating on what the experience can be than just to rein it back using old ways of thinking. So I'm hoping that rather than building better and better brakes, we can build better and better radar or something. So that
the bad actors can use the technology too.
So we sort of proactively manage things rather than sort of saying, look, the only safe way is to not make a payment. And sooner or later we'll find ourselves handing over
go back to checks and cash.
Billions of gold instead. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. Okay, yeah, 100%.
My last question, so this panel is about looking back 5 years. If we were to have this panel again in 5 years, what do you think we'll be talking about in 5 years' time, which is also kind of asking you for your predictions, Christian?
You remember when real-time payments were real-time? Now they're batch. No, I don't think so. I mean, one thing that I've said a few times on these sort of stages is that I think we'll stop talking about it as real-time payments, because we'll just be payments, just like we're not talking about digital transactions, if they're not cash. I mean, it's more like we're now talking about cash as specific. It's the whole sort of color TV ceasing to be color TV and the other one being black and white instead. So I think in 5 years' time, we will look at now as a very interesting time when a lot of big decisions were made. Maybe not all of them understood to be big. my personal view is very much that pay to in some form will turn out to be the default for so many types of transactions. And we, including Manuva and myself, we try to make it all understandable to people who don't think about payments nearly as much as we do, by saying it's like a real-time direct debit, etc. And it's selling a lot of things short, just to make it a little bit easier to sort of get a sense of what's the benefit, the so what. I mean, a lot of what we talk about here, we might all think is super important, but for a larger group of people, it might seem pretty esoteric. So I think we're going to talk about, remember when Pay 2 wasn't what we normally spoke about? And I think we're going to look at the international component way more. It's going to seem very strange that there were once islands that didn't really talk to each other, and that it was okay to be real time and in between, allowing 7 days, and it's like old shipping lanes. I think that's going to be it.
Great. Katrina.
So I think we'll be talking about how I get my superannuation paid at the same time as my payroll on the NPP. All my invoices will be invoices with then the payments made using Pay2, and I'll be doing my shopping online through my Pay2 agreement at Amazon, hopefully. So, and we won't talk about BSB and account numbers anymore. They'll be a thing of the past because we'll be using other things like PayID. So I think it'll be about really how things have built upon the foundational layer that we have in place today.
Yeah, a lot more embedded payments, maybe. Yep. You may. What do you think we'll be talking about in 5 years' time?
I think I echo what Christian said on the international component, because while, yes, Australia is on NPP and that's great, a lot of countries are not. So, for example, New Zealand just went 24/7, I think a few months ago. In the US, even ACH doesn't work on weekends or public holidays, which is crazy. So as more governments start improving their domestic infrastructure, they'll start looking to other countries as well. And I think part of the discussion will be on how do we involve non-banks to join these schemes.
And David.
I guess for me, we're an international company. We're working on real-time payment projects in 9 different countries around the world. I can see some clues from some of those projects. If you look to the UK, we've helped people build open banking payment initiation solutions that essentially start off with an open banking flow and then provide a open banking, run into a faster payments payment on the back of that. And so to me, that feels like, I would imagine we will see that in Australia once the CDR action initiation legislation goes through. If I look to the US, interesting space over there right now. With FedNow, we're working with some banks over there, helping them integrate into that. It's interesting because they have 2 sets of real-time payment rails over there. Don't feel that will happen in Australia, but who knows, in 5 years, who knows what will happen. You may spoke about the interlinkage of real-time payments in Asia. I suspect that will happen. I'm sure Katrina's can let us know about that. But to me, I guess real-time payments is definitely the way forward. Direct entry is certainly past its use-by date in terms of trying to work with 18-character lodgement reference and batch-based processing. So I think there's some exciting times ahead.
Thank you very much. I don't know if we're out of time or if we have time maybe for one audience question. We can take a question? Does anyone have a question?
Hi, how you going? Great session. Really enjoyed listening to it. My question is for you, Katrina. Interested to hear how the new pricing framework, wholesale pricing coming out for the NPP, is going to foster innovation and open up the rails to the entire market, essentially.
Sure. So since the NPP went live, we didn't have a transaction-based pricing approach because as the platform was new and we were looking to build up volumes, we put in place a cost recovery approach whereby the operating costs for the platform were covered by the shareholders who had invested in building it and deploying the platform. From next year, we are moving to a transaction-based pricing approach, and the intention there is to really make it more of a user pays kind of approach in terms of having a equitable and transparent approach. We have tried to sort of look at how we best put in place pricing for the different services that will reflect kind of the usage and the capabilities that are being used from the platform. We are still very focused on how we can seek to bring down costs from a wholesale perspective as volumes grow. So our intention is to see how the price can come down over time. I mean, if you look at the kind of computed transaction costs that we would have had on the platform over the last 5 years, it started at kind of 35 cents. It's now down to about 5 cents from a wholesale perspective. Obviously, from an end user perspective, the pricing is determined by the bank or the payment service provider and whoever's providing the services, and they will be pricing for the value that they are delivering to their customers as well. But it's something obviously we'll continue to look at very closely. If we need to make changes to it, we will. But it's really intended to make sure that for everyone who is benefiting from the platform, that it's kind of equitable to everybody in terms of the cost for that.
Time for one more, or yeah, one more question? Oh, yeah, down the back. And was there one in the middle?
Thanks so much for the share about capabilities in terms of real-time payments and where it's moving to. Just in terms of a few questions around going concern, what are, I guess, in the planning or the pipeline around security and load, in terms of delivering that real-time payments capabilities and globally as well? Be great to understand some best practices, some shares, some processes, particularly at organisation level, to be able to handle those challenges. Load meaning, we're all going to go to real time, and then we're doing it in cloud. Who is it? Amazon that's going to handle those loads, and who's going to be able to manage that?
And do you mean challenges for the payers and payees, or challenges for the platform?
Whole ecosystem? Yeah, some.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll start and then you can continue. So from an infrastructure perspective, we are always very focused on the processing capacity of the platform and how we are prepared for that, particularly as we think about bringing across the kind of 3 billion transactions from direct entry. And we are requiring the participating organisations who connect directly to uplift their volumetrics in preparation for that. Certainly where we look at where the platform is today and the headroom that we've got, there's definitely sufficient room. We're also working with Swift, who's the vendor of the infrastructure, to see how we migrate some of the NPP componentry over to the cloud as well, and that would basically then be working with a number of the cloud providers in terms of having them ready to support NPP payment gateways. That's probably a little way off still, but it's very much on our kind of future plans, particularly as we see the banks wanting to move their tech stack into the cloud. New organisations like FinTechs are obviously very focused on cloud, and so having a solution that caters to that is going to be important.
If the question is a broader ecosystem one, I can add a sentence, and I don't know if maybe Wise wants to as well. It's a competitive disadvantage to not be scalable and to not be able to move transactions at the kind of volumes that are required. There is behind the scenes sort of I don't know, it's not the intention, but there's sort of a naming and shaming email chain for everyone who's on the on NPP. If someone has an issue, it's a message is sent out to everyone else in the network saying this particular institution is having an issue. Sometimes it's just self-suspension because of testing or something. Sometimes it's a challenge. If Maneuver had started to put in lots and lots of rate limiting, etc., there'd be others who say, well, look, you can't really trust them. So I think there's a real competitive, it's part of the competitive edge of making sure that we can handle it. Ultimately, we are, as anyone on top of this infrastructure, limited by what the infrastructure can handle. We can't say we can do 2 trillion transactions, and the infrastructure behind us says we can do 1 million. But it's something that is built to last in a sophisticated economy where transaction volumes are going up and not down. So I don't think it's a specific issue to NPP, but yeah, again, what we're seeing seems to be building resilience for the future.
And from a resilience perspective, we require participants to be up basically all the time except for 2 minutes a month. So, I think that's quite a high standard. to meet. And because the NPP is a distributed architecture and it was designed that way, that if one of the particular banks is having an issue, all of the other banks can continue to operate as well. So that was a kind of an intentional design aspect of the NPP from a resilience point of view, because obviously ensuring that the platform is up and running is critical.
Great. For any more questions, everyone on the panel I think is staying for lunch. There are plenty of people from Maneuver around. They're sponsoring a coffee cart. New Payments Platform have a roundtable immediately after lunch. Endeavour are in the booth in the exhibitors stage on the left of the main room, and there are lots of people from Wise here, and you will be here over lunch as well. So any more questions, come and find them.